navigating life, when you're in the public eye, trying to figure out who you are, relationships, it's a lot.
It really is. And doing it all with social media, watching every single move, that adds a whole other layer.
Totally. How do you even hang on to your own truth when, like, everyone seems to have an opinion?
That's maybe the big challenge today, isn't it? Especially for people living visible lives, the speed of information, how narratives get built online. Just sharing your story feels, well, really vulnerable.
Yeah, vulnerable is the word. And that vulnerability, that challenge, that's exactly why we're doing this deep dive today.
Right. We're looking at these excerpts from a recent YouTube interview, a public figure choosing her own platform, wanting to share her personal truth, a space where she felt safe.
Exactly. Her goal, as she put it, was to just lay it out there from her perspective.
So our mission here is to really unpack what she shared in these clips. What are the key insights about maybe resilience, relationships, and definitely the impact of the digital age? We're sticking just to what's in these excerpts.
Think of it like we're exploring this raw, personal story together. Let's start where she starts setting the stage, her emotional state. She says right off the bat why she's doing it. Telling her truth, her story on her platform, a safe space.
Yeah, and she doesn't really hold back on how she's feeling. She says she feels all over the place.
Right.
Paints this picture of like really fluctuating emotions. 1 minute I'm happy, 1 minute I'm sad, 1 minute I'm like, fuck this shit. It's very candid about the internal struggle.
That candor is really striking. How does she say she copes when she feels like that, so all over the place?
Well, it seems like she finds some perspective by thinking about how, everyone goes through stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Breakups, divorce, loss, jobs. She frames life as this kind of lesson, right? Learning from mistakes. That shared human experience, that seems like that's a bit of an anchor for her.
That makes sense. But even while trying to find that perspective, she talks about feeling really let down by people she thought would support her.
Oh, definitely. She specifically says she felt like people she expected to be in her corner just weren't there.
Yeah.
Uses phrases like, nobody called me check, or nobody called me to see how I was doing. And there's this added layer of pain, like she felt some people were thinking, he thought, like doubting the genuineness of the support she expected.
Wow. That feeling of being alone in it, especially with public scrutiny, it really hits home, doesn't it? The difference between like a public network and actual personal support.
It really does. It shows that even with a huge platform, going through hard times can feel incredibly lonely behind the scenes.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and unpack this next big part of the conversation, her relationship with Diddy. She talks about meeting him during his love era, as she calls it.
Right, a time when he was getting a lot of public praise. She
Yeah.
mentions the Global Icon Award, Lifetime Achievement, Key to the City, all that.
So a really high point for him publicly. And she says she felt crucified or like singled out just for celebrating him then when everyone else was.
Exactly. She felt she was part of that public celebration. And then when things shifted, she caught flack for that past association. But here's the really crucial point she makes about her personal experience versus the later public narrative.
What's that?
She draws a very, very clear line. She repeats it. Her experience dating him was different from the allegations and lawsuits that came out later.
Okay.
She said point blank, that wasn't my experience, or I wasn't around at the time. And regarding the things being discussed publicly, I don't know that person.
So the key takeaway here is she's separating her lived reality in that relationship from the public accusations, stating she didn't experience or witness those things herself.
Precisely. She's speaking only from her firsthand experience, which she says was different. And the source adds some really important context for her stance on certain issues.
You mean her own history?
Yes. She shares that she's a survivor of domestic violence from previous relationships, not this one, but past ones. And that history really shapes her strong stance against ever tolerating it, especially as a mom now. She says things like, I will never put myself in that situation again, and I don't stand for domestic violence. It gives a lot of weight to her perspective on her own relationship experiences.
Okay, that context is vital. Now, she also talks about how she saw the benefits of the relationship. She says it was good for both of them.
Yeah, from her perspective.
Yeah.
She gives examples like becoming a brand ambassador for De Leon. She feels she made it popular, saying something like, everybody wasn't drinking De Leon, but when I came, it was just like, we tried Dale when we acted bad. And she points to her show, Carisha Please, becoming the #1 podcast on Revolt during that time. Tangible career benefits as she saw them.
That gives her view on the professional side, but her motivation for the relationship, that was interesting too, wasn't it?
It really was. She pushes back against the idea it was about material stuff. Purses, jets, diamonds.
Her stated goal was different. It was about learning business, networking, becoming a mogul. She literally says, I'm up under. I want to learn something. And even asks rhetorically, how can I make Koresha please the next Sean John?
Wow, okay. So she frames it, at least partly, as like a strategic move for her own business growth, directly from her.
Yeah, it paints a picture of ambition,
Yeah.
seeking knowledge, connections, and she mentions he apparently saw something in her, encouraged the podcast. Plus, on a personal level, she reflects that he brought out her gentle side, her woman side, saw her as an icon, a mogul, and stressed putting God first.
So business and a perceived personal impact, then things shifted, and she talked about deciding to step back after the allegations against him surfaced.
Yeah.
What was her reason for that, according to the interview?
Her explanation centers on, well, self-preservation and focus. She said she needed a break, focus on her career, her family, let him deal with his stuff.
And she repeated that she didn't want to get caught up in something that wasn't her experience. Even while saying he was great to her, they fell in love. He didn't expect to fall in love with me because we ended up falling in love with each other. But ultimately, the decision was about needing to pour into me.
That phrase, pour into me, it
Yes.
really sticks. Prioritizing yourself, your own growth, especially when things get chaotic externally.
Yeah, it signals a real moment of, like, intentional self-focus.
Speaking of changing dynamics, she also gets into her relationship with JT and where things stand with City Girls. How does she describe that situation now?
She puts it as, ain't all good, and it's not all bad. So, sounds complex, no big beef, she says. Still family,
Yeah.
but they're not as close. It's not like we on the phone, we chi every day.
So some distance there, but maybe not outright conflict. What does she say led to this kind of rockiness behind the scenes?
She implies it's been building for a while, saying it's been a minute since shit going on behind closed do. Suggests issues that weren't maybe obvious to the public. She also mentions feeling like they outgrew each other. And, practical stuff like physical distance, one's in Miami, one's in LA.
And did she describe feeling disconnected even when they were working together?
Yeah, she did.
Yeah.
Talked about being in different headspaces, different styles,
Yeah.
even separate setups on tour, like separate dressing rooms, glam teams, only really interacting during the stage routines. It sounds like they were just growing apart personally and professionally.
That sounds tough to manage. And she mentioned a very practical factor influencing her move towards solo projects, too.
Oh, yeah, very practical. She's quite blunt about it.
Yeah.
Says the group wasn't making money, wasn't working consistently, ain't no money in the group, and we not working.
Right.
So that reality pushed her, she says, to do something, because I in this group, the group ain't making no money, we not working.
Yeah.
And she connects that directly to needing to provide for her kids.
That makes her motivation for branching out pretty clear. From her side, she also talked about that specific Twitter incident, the argument between Cardi B and JT over the Super Freaky Girl remix. What was her perspective on that?
She said she was asleep when it all went down, caught up later, and her take was basically it had nothing to do with her personally.
Right.
She even says something like, bitch, I got left off of Bad Boy, meaning she wasn't asked to be on the remix herself, wasn't looped in, so she felt it wasn't her fight.
So she didn't step in that time, but she put that in context, right, by talking about her history of defending JT.
Exactly. She stresses that she has always had JT's back before. Gives an example, telling Jada White to meet me in Brickley. She emphasizes her loyalty, fuck being in a group, just her being my motherfucking bitch, one fight, we all fight. So she frames not jumping into that specific Twitter thing as it not being about her rather than any lack of loyalty overall.
Okay, that context is important. Beyond the relationships, the interview really digs into her own drive, investing in herself, betting on myself, as she puts it.
Yeah, that's a huge theme. Feeling like an underdog, maybe, and channeling that into building your own empire. She says she's putting every dollar, every P that I got into myself.
And she gives specifics.
Yeah, paying for her own studio, hiring and firing her own team managers, business managers, lawyers, really taking the reins,
It's a major move towards independence, taking that kind of control. She does touch on a challenge, though, getting feedback about her music maybe not showing growth.
Yeah, she acknowledges that industry feedback is something she's dealing with. But then the conversation shifts pretty quickly to something that sounds like it impacts her even more personally. The internet.
Ah, yes. This part felt really raw. How does she describe the internet's effect on her personality?
She feels like she's actually lost her personality because In her words, everything is so literally now.
So literally now, what does that mean to her?
It sounds like every casual comment, every spontaneous moment just gets picked apart, taken out of context, made into this big literal thing it was never meant to be. The nuance gets lost.
That sounds exhausting. And it affects how she acts.
Definitely. She says she's scared to pop up on live now. Something they used to do all the time, just spontaneously going live anywhere. But that fear of misinterpretation, the backlash, it's killed that spontaneity.
And the negative comments. She talks about the toll they take.
Oh, yeah. She says reading comments really take away from, like, you get in your head, like you start overthinking everything. It's intense. She gives examples of comments like, you should give up, bit you ain't shit.
Wow.
And admits those things make her actually question herself, thinking, damn, should I give up yes and I ain't shit?
It's brutal hearing those doubts amplified online like that.
It really shows the psychological weight, doesn't it? Even for someone who seems strong. But she does find a contrast in real-world interactions.
Right. The difference between online hate and offline love. She says when you go outside and you feel that love, you just be like, brash, you got to keep going. That in-person support seems crucial.
And she mentioned K. Michelle reaching out, offering support. That sounds like it was a big deal, too.
What did K. Michelle say?
Apparently something like, this is what happens to superstars. Everybody go up, and you have a time where shit happens, and you shoot right back up. Kind of framing the tough times as part of the journey and believing she'll bounce back. External validation when she needed it, maybe.
That's a really powerful message to receive. So thinking about bouncing back, what does she say is next for her based on the interview?
She lists a few things. A music project or single is apparently ready to go. There's Koresha Please Season 2, a reality show, and also Reveille Loaded Part 2, The Game.
Okay, The Game. Did she give any details on the new version?
Yeah, a little bit. A new look, blue, pink, white, unisex. And apparently you can make money in this version. She showed some sample cards, the idea of dares, shots, paying coins. Sounds like they've expanded on it.
Interesting. And finally, she gives a shout out to someone who's been a big support.
Yes, a public thank you to Saucy Santana. Calls him her shoulder, her therapist, acknowledges him being in my corner. It just underlines how important that close personal support is, especially when you're dealing with so much public and private pressure.
Definitely. So, reflecting on this whole deep dive, what really stands out is her personal take on navigating this crazy balancing act, right? Trying to be authentic while dealing with constant online judgment.
Yeah, the journey she outlines is full of tough lessons. Relationships, feeling let down, building resilience, and just grappling with how the internet makes everything so literally now, affecting how spontaneous you can be, how you feel about yourself.
And through it all, that theme she started with, finding her truth, finding her footing. Despite all the noise, the struggle, there's this strong current of pouring into me, betting on herself.
It's a powerful focus amidst the chaos she describes.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? How does that constant online scrutiny affect us? Our own sense of self, our willingness to just be spontaneous, even in small ways. How do you protect your authentic self when the world seems determined to take everything so literally now?
Yeah, and what does it really mean to invest in yourself emotionally, mentally, not just financially when you're getting all this unfiltered feedback, raunched or not? Her experience definitely brings those questions up for all of us, I think.